Chapter 17 of Abraham Lincoln, A History, Volume 6. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Abraham Lincoln, A History, Volume 6, by John Hay and John George Nicolay. Chapter 17, Colonization. The political creed of Abraham Lincoln embraced, among other tenets, a belief in the value and promise of colonization as one means of solving the great race problem involved in the existence of slavery in the United States. This belief he had learned from the teachings of some of the most eminent American statesmen, notably from the leader and idol of the Whig party, Henry Clay. It was a theory which commended itself especially to progressive thinkers in the Southern States as a doctrine permitting them the expression of liberal and humane views on slavery without subjecting them to the odium connecting itself with the avowal of what was stigmatized as simple abolitionism. We need not here discuss the doctrine of colonization. It had been advocated for half a century, favored by some of the greatest minds of the nation, and the government was fully committed to it by the part it had practically and officially taken in the establishment of first the colony and afterwards the independent state of Liberia. When we consider all the conditions under which that experiment was tried, it is perhaps equally rash to pronounce it either a success or a failure. Without being an enthusiast, Lincoln was a firm believer in colonization. He did not shut his eyes to its difficulties. "If all earthly power were given me," said he in debate with Douglas, "I should not know what to do as to the existing institution. My first impulse would be to free all the slaves and send them to Liberia, to their own native land. But a moment's reflection would convince me that whatever of high hope as I think there may be in this, in the long run its sudden execution is impossible. If they were all landed there in a day, they would all perish in the next 10 days, and there are not surplus shipping and surplus money enough in the world to carry them there in many times 10 days." But he had also said a year before, "The enterprise is a difficult one, but where there is a will, there is a way, and what colonization needs most is a hearty will. Will springs from the two elements of moral sense and self-interest. Let us be brought to believe it is morally right, and at the same time favorable to, or at least not against our interest, to transfer the African to his native clime, and we shall find a way to do it, however great the task may be." When Lincoln uttered these sentiments, he little dreamed that the problem would ever confront him in a serious practical form. But already, during the first year of the war, large numbers of slaves in rebel states not only became actually free by escape or capture, but also legally free through the operation of the earliest Confiscation Act, approved August 6, 1861. In this new condition, their protection and maintenance to a considerable extent fell upon the government, and while the able-bodied rendered service in return, the care and support of those incapable of military labor formed a serious burden upon Army resources and supervision. In touching on the question in his first annual message to Congress, the President took into view the future of slaves freed and to be freed by Army movements. He had already resolved upon his plan of compensated abolishment, through which he hoped to bring about emancipation in the border States, and it seemed to him that nothing would contribute so powerfully to this result as some comprehensive and well-considered scheme of colonization. He therefore strongly urged the project in his message, recommending the appropriation of money and the acquisition of territory for that object, keeping always in view, however, as specifically declared in his later messages, that it should be with the consent of the freed people. Congress responded to these recommendations by 3 distinct enactments. First, the appropriation of $100,000 to aid in the colonization and settlement of such free Negroes residing in the District of Columbia, or of those to be freed under the Emancipation Act for that district, as may desire to emigrate to the Republic of Hayti or Liberia, or such other country beyond the limits of the United States as the President may determine. Second, an appropriation of $500,000 to carry out the act of Congress for the emancipation of the slaves in the District of Columbia, and to colonize those to be made free by the probable passage of a confiscation bill. Third, a clause of the Confiscation Act that the President of the United States is hereby authorized to make provision for the transportation, colonization, and settlement in some tropical country beyond the limits of the United States of such persons of the African race made free by the provisions of this act as may be willing to emigrate, having first obtained the consent of the government of said country to their protection and settlement within the same, with all the rights and privileges of free men. In accordance with the authority conferred by these acts, Mr. Seward, on the 30th of September, addressed a circular to the governments of England, France, the Netherlands, and Denmark, making known to them the desire of the President to enter into negotiations on the subject of colonization with any foreign power having territory or colonies within the tropics, which, maintaining free constitutional government, might desire the benefits of such emigration. He suggested a 10 years treaty, mentioning also somewhat elaborate specifications of guarantees for the perpetual freedom, protection, and equal rights of the colonists and their descendants. Both before and after the transmission of this circular, various propositions came to the Department of State offering lands for such colonization in the Danish island of St. Croix, West Indies, in the Netherlands colony of Suriname, in the British colony of Guyana, in British Honduras, in Haiti, in Liberia, in New Granada, and in Ecuador. Among these propositions, two only commended themselves to the special attention of the President. The first was a colony proposed to be settled on the lands lying on the lagoon and harbor of Chiriqui in the northwestern corner of the State of Panama, of the Republic of New Granada, along the line of one of the proposed ship canals across the Isthmus of Darien. It was reported that here, in addition to the ordinary advantages of tropical soil and climate, and its proximity to a prospective route of international commerce, there existed valuable deposits of coal, the mining of which for naval supply would at once furnish profitable occupation to labor. This locality seemed to offer such a combination of favorable opportunities that Mr. Lincoln for a time interested himself greatly in the examination and furtherance of the enterprise, and a preliminary contract was made with the grantee of the lands to begin colonization and improvements as soon as an eligible site could be selected. Two obstacles to the consummation of the scheme, however, developed themselves. One was that a conflict of title and jurisdiction between the States of Costa Rica and New Granada was brought to the notice of the Department of State, which caused a suspension of preparations until it could be settled. The other was of a yet more serious character. Documents and reports which had been submitted to the President seemed sufficiently to authenticate the existence of valuable coal beds at the point indicated, but feeling a necessity for the greatest caution in an undertaking of such magnitude and consequence, he referred the question to Professor Henry of the Smithsonian Institution for scientific examination. This discreet and learned officer answered that the geological formation of the Chiriqui district is not that of the true coal measures, but that of the tertiary deposit in which only lignite is found. He further enclosed the written opinion of an expert, which pronounced the Chiriqui coal of little or no commercial value. A boxful of it sent to the Academy of Sciences, Philadelphia, has slacked down to a boxful of coal dirt. This is, of course, owing to the abundance of sulphuret of iron. It would be a dangerous coal also to carry on voyages, for it would spontaneously take fire. I think that if the government owned large beds and extensive tracts favorably situated for getting out the coal, it would not use the coal when placed in depot, and would abandon the mines after they had been opened. Professor Henry therefore added this emphatic advice: I hope the government will not make any contracts in regard to the purchase of the Chiriqui district until it has been thoroughly examined by persons of known capacity and integrity. A critical examination of all that has been reported on the existence of valuable beds of coal in that region has failed to convince me of the fact. This revelation, added to the controversy about the title, seems to have terminated the Chiriqui enterprise. Before this result was reached, another project had been under consideration to establish a colony on one of the islands of Hayti. A Mr. Bernard Koch, represented to be a businessman, thus described the locality in a letter to the President: The most beautiful, healthy, and fertile of all the islands belonging to the Republic of Hayti is the island of Avache, which is about 12 miles from the city of Aux-Cayes. It covers an area of about 100 square miles, is known to be free from reptiles, and to have a healthy and agreeable temperature, the thermometer rising rarely above 80 degrees in the shade, in consequence of its exposure to the trade winds. The interior of the island is hilly, in some places rising as high as 300 feet above the level of the sea. It is well timbered with mahogany, oak, hard and dye woods, while in the neighborhood of the coast it is mostly prairie land and ready for the plow. As would be expected in a country like this, the soil and climate are adapted for all tropical productions, particularly sugar, coffee, indigo, and more especially cotton, which is indigenous. Upon the north side of the island is the beautiful Bay of Ferret, with an average depth of 28 feet, upon whose bosom a large fleet could repose in safety, secure from the storms of the ocean. And here it is proposed to erect a commercial city, with all the conveniences necessary to such an enterprise. Before the revolution which gave St. Domingo to the colored race, a portion of this island was cultivated by the Duke of Praslin, to whom it belonged by right of concession, but the French were driven from it, and for nearly 100 years it has been a solitary waste, awaiting the hand of industry to awaken its echoes. Attracted by its beauty, the value of its timber, its extreme fertility, and its adaptation for the cultivation of cotton, I prevailed upon President Geffrard to concede the island to me for 20 years, the documentary evidence of which has been lodged with the Secretary of the Interior. On the 31st of December, 1862, the President signed a contract under which Bernard Koch, for a compensation of $50 per head from the government, agreed to colonize 5,000 persons of African descent on the island of Avache. The contractor bound himself to furnish the colonists comfortable houses, garden lots, substantial food, medical attendance, and medicines, provide them churches, religious instruction, and elementary schools, and employ them during 4 years for money wages at rates varying from $4 per month for minors and women to $10 per month for male adults. 10 hours' work to constitute a day's labor. The contractor further agreed to procure from the Haytian government the guarantee stipulated for in Mr. Seward's circular of September 30, 1862, proposing emigration to foreign governments as follows: all such emigrants and their posterity shall forever remain free, and in no case be reduced to bondage, slavery, or involuntary servitude, except for crime; and they shall specially enjoy liberty of conscience and the right to acquire, hold, and transmit property, and all other privileges of persons common to the inhabitants of the country in which they reside. It should be further stipulated that in cases of indigence resulting from injury, sickness, or age, any of such immigrants who shall become paupers shall not thereupon be suffered to perish or come to want, but shall be supported and cared for as is customary with similar inhabitants of the country in which they shall be residents. Koch thereupon sought the financial assistance of certain capitalists in New York and Boston, and laid before them this brilliant scheme of speculation. He would transport 500 emigrants to this island. They would immediately begin a plantation on which, by the 1st of the following September, a period of 8 or 9 months, he would guarantee a crop of 1,000 bales of cotton, which cotton, at the prospective war price of $1 per pound and 450 pounds to the bale, would yield nearly $500,000. The estimate of necessary outlay to accomplish this result he placed at $70,000. The hearts of millionaires could not withstand the temptation of a project which promised a profit of more than 600% in 9 months, especially as it combined itself with the opportunity of promoting great moral benefits to country and humanity. Without taking the necessary time and pains to investigate rigidly the personal character and qualifications of Bernard Koch, or even to inspect the contract which the President had signed, but depending blindly upon the misrepresentations Koch made to them, they became responsible for considerable advances and expenditures with which he began to freight ships and collect emigrants. But a brief time had elapsed when it became known to the government that Bernard Koch was an irresponsible and untruthful adventurer, whose project had no substantial foundation except his lease of the island and the confidence the capitalists had given him. There was also an ominous rumor that he was in league with Captain Semmes, the Confederate privateer, to hand over the negroes to him on the high seas as captured runaway slaves. Under such circumstances, the President not only refused to proceed, but immediately caused the contract to be canceled. This turn of affairs left the capitalists in an awkward situation, and to secure their financial venture on the one hand and the continuance of the experiment of colonization on the other, they caused Bernard Koch to assign his lease of the island to them, and they in their own names entered into a contract with the Secretary of the Interior on the 6th of April, 1863, similar in its main features to the one which had been canceled. Under this second contract, a shipload of colonists was collected from among the contrabands about Fort Monroe, and during that month the Ocean Ranger sailed for Isle aux Vaches with colored emigrants, variously stated to number from 411 to 453 persons, about one-third of whom were women and children. In the absence of full records, there is uncertainty, not alone about the number of persons, the date of sailing, and date of arrival, but also about the correctness of charges of neglect and privation during the voyage. One sad occurrence is admitted by all. Through some carelessness, infection from a military hospital on Craney Island was carried on shipboard, and during the voyage smallpox broke out, from which 20 or 30 died. The scourge was soon controlled after landing, but other hardships confronted the colonists. No hospital was ready for the sick. No houses were ready for those who were well. The small stock of lumber sent out was used for the main buildings and warehouses, and the working people were obliged to shelter themselves in huts of wicker work and palm leaf thatch, rudely constructed after the Haytian fashion. Exposure, which ought to have been provided against, brought a certain amount of sickness which might have been avoided. The delays attending the sailing brought the colony to its destination in an unpropitious season. Bernard Koch was sent along as governor of the colony because of the legal formalities necessary to the assignment of his lease. But although he was merely a political and financial dummy, he put on the airs of a petty despot, and by neglect and oppression rendered himself so obnoxious to the colonists that they finally drove him from the island. Some of the white superintendents sickened and died. Insect pests tormented the badly sheltered people. Between accusations of mismanagement and oppression on the one side, and of idleness, extravagant demands, and mutiny on the other, the quiet and security of the settlement were far from Arcadian. Churches and schools remained only dreams of a forgotten promise. The Haytian government naturalized the emigrants, but refused to give the guarantee stipulated for by Mr. Seward. It is alleged that parties on the mainland, interested in rival projects of colonization, busied themselves in stirring up discontent to thwart the enterprise. The 1st of September came, but there were no crops for food, no 1,000 bales of cotton, only a wharf and a number of buildings on a fine bay and harbor, flanked by a motley and miserable collection of huts, and some roads cut through the almost impenetrable jungle from the extemporized village to the more eligible savannas or prairies lying a mile or two inland. Rumors of the situation had come to the President, and on the 17th of October, D.C. Donahue, a special agent, was instructed to go to the colony to investigate its condition and afford it relief. Numerous unavoidable causes delayed his arrival until the 15th of December. On the 12th of December, the silent partner in the firm of capitalists, whose names were signed to the contract, wrote to the Secretary of the Interior, saying, "By the next steamer I shall send out instructions to supply them, the emigrants, with nothing more at our expense, nor shall we pay any further drafts that may be made for their support." The report of the special agent says, "Upon my arrival at the island, I was informed that the company, the contractors with the government, had ceased to give the emigrants either employment or wages since the 5th day of November, 40 days before my arrival. I found that there was but a small stock of provisions upon the island, and but a small portion of these suitable for the sick." Another part of his report states, "I found there surviving of that party a few of the number at O'Kay's, 378 souls. The residue of the 431 mentioned in the journal of one Bernard Koch, who accompanied the emigrants, had either died or returned to the United States. My information is that the number of the latter was 8. Of the number on the island, 31 were seriously sick, and numerous others more or less disabled from the effects of poisonous insects in their feet. 4 died before leaving the island." According to the instructions he had received, the special agent immediately assumed charge of the emigrants, furnishing them with the necessaries of life, and ameliorating their condition in every feasible way. He found upon inquiry that the Haytian government was unwilling that the emigrants should remain upon the island, and they, on the other hand, were thoroughly dissatisfied and of one desire, to return to the United States. As soon, therefore, as the necessary arrangements could be made, the Secretary of the Interior sent a vessel to bring them back, and on the 4th of March, 1864, the survivors sailed from the island on the ship Marshalsea Day, casting anchor in the Potomac River opposite Alexandria, Virginia, on the 20th of the same month. The statements of both sides are so conflicting that it is impossible to form a satisfactory judgment whether, under better management, this experiment of colonization would have succeeded. The company alleged that their agents and superintendents, by actual trial, demonstrated the essential unfruitfulness of the soil. The government's special agent declared that the island of Vache is inconceivably fertile and as well watered as could be desired, very healthy considering the latitude, and well calculated to support the emigrants and yield a large surplus of the most valuable products. During my stay on the island, the colonists, under my direction, neatly dressed a field of about 20 acres of cotton, then just springing from the ground, and I had the pleasure, before my departure, of seeing this cotton beginning to ripen, having obtained a growth far beyond any I had ever seen, though I have visited and been acquainted with the best cotton-growing regions of the United States. To this statement he, however, adds the further opinion, for the formation of which his observations and experience would seem to have furnished him good opportunities: "There are, in my judgment, reasons which will, for many years to come, render abortive all attempts at colonizing the free colored people of the United States in the Republic of Hayti, prominent among which are the great dissimilarities which exist in language, religion, education, and government. But aside from theories that might be faulty, or reports of observation which might prove inaccurate, the events of the war had already moved the question forward beyond the stage of judicious experiment. No further effort at colonization was made by the President, and by an act approved July 2, 1864, Congress repealed its appropriations for that object. Chapter 17.